As artificial intelligence rapidly reshapes the workplace, organizations are facing a new challenge: how to prioritize and develop the uniquely human capacities that machines can't replicate.
I'm Micah Scalen.
And I'm Noah Scalen.
We are business partners, siblings, and we've spent the past decade helping leaders build the creative capacity they need to thrive. Now we've gathered experts at the intersection of art and science to explore this rapidly changing landscape.
It's time to unlock the full potential of human creativity as a strategic advantage in the age of AI. Welcome to the ROI of Creativity.
Today, we're joined by Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. Zorana is a senior research scientist at Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, where she studies the role of emotion, emotional intelligence, and self-regulation in creativity and well-being. She is the author of The Creativity Choice, the science of making decisions to turn ideas into actions. Welcome, Zorana.
Thank you for having me.
Loved your book and I have many, many questions, but I want to start by rewinding it and asking, what inspired you to focus your research on the intersection of emotion and creativity? Because that's different.
Yeah, I love that you're starting with that because that is my biggest question about creativity. We talk about it as thinking, as problem solving, but then we experience something else. We experience, just like you mentioned, as people were drawing, that anxiety. Oh, wow, now we are facing a blank canvas or a blank screen, and we have to do something that is fully open-ended. Where do we go? And I have experienced that personally. I remember from personal experience, just being a little kid who loved to draw, but then being in a school setting and getting very anxious and having all those thoughts, what do other people want me to do? And then kept noticing that in other circumstances, kept noticing frustration. Sometimes frustration can be inspirational, like you are noticing something frustrating in the world and you go and say, I want to solve this problem. I want to make things better. I want to do something new. But then frustration can be, I am in a bottleneck. I am in a state of block. And I wondered about all of these paradoxes in creativity. So I wanted to talk about what we don't normally talk about.
Wow. And, not only you conduct your own research, but in the book you also cover and do a really good job of explaining other people's research and how that research was conducted. And it really drew me in that a study is really a story. So so far in your study of the intersection of emotion and creativity, what is the story so far?
Sometimes people don't think of science as creative because there are lots of rules in science. But I love how you are making an analogy with storytelling, because science is about storytelling. It is about discovering and playing and asking different questions. And then it is about finding different ways we can try to answer those questions. And then finding answers, and all of these answers are going to be partial, and then the story continues. It's like a story like a serialized story. You get part of it, and then you get more, and then you fill in the missing pieces. So I love that part of science that is like storytelling. And I think that especially when we are talking about emotions and creativity, we are learning a lot. We are, first of all, learning that there are no good and bad emotions. Emotions are information. They are telling us what is going on in our own mind. They are telling us what is going on in the world around us. And we can use that information to make those choices and make the decisions in our creative process. That seems very counterintuitive because in a normal everyday discourse, we create a duality. We say that emotions are in the way. You are making emotional decisions when you mean you are not making good decisions. But we have to change how we are talking about it.
I love that. Really also making it okay to talk about the emotions of the situation because they are so critical. The emotions are not going anywhere. And it is one of the many misconceptions that you tackle in this book about creativity. And that's definitely the business that Noah and I are also in, is often really understanding what are the misconceptions people have. And it's the same ones that come up over and over again. And one example that I loved in the book was about the importance of having constraints. We call it embracing limitations, but you talk about it a lot, and you also talk about some interesting examples. Could you speak to that?
It's a great example to connect emotions to how we think about creativity and how we implement it. So we don't want any constraints. We like to think creativity thrives on freedom and of full freedom of action. But the reality is that we do better if we have some constraints. To take a step back, imagine a situation when you have no constraints whatsoever. There is no place to start. And if there is no place to start, you are going to start because we happen to be human, and human mind works in a particular way. Human mind, if doesn't have any particular direction, it will start with the most obvious direction. And that makes sense in most situations in our everyday lives. Start where it's most obvious, because that has worked in the past. Chances are it's going to work again. Except that if we aim for creativity, we don't want those things that have worked in the past, because they're going to be repeating what we did in the past. And we are not going to be original. We are not going to do something new. And if we have a constraint, it's going to move us away from what is obvious and force us into new direction.
Can I jump in? Because what I really liked about your book was that there's this science aspect to it, which, as you know, we're coming from an art aspect of it. And I love seeing that data, that there's, this has been grounded in reality. Can you just briefly talk to how some of these studies are done? So when you talk about something like the constraints, like how do you discover that this is true?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. So how you start is by saying, well, let's set up an experiment. We intuitively believe that freedom is the best thing for creativity. But we also know that sometimes in real life there are constraints. So let's see what might be the influence on constraints on what you actually end up being able to do. Okay, so you recruit people to participate in your study, and you say this group of people is going to have full freedom of doing whatever they wish to do. And then another group is going to be only allowed to do things with some limitations. And I love how you have used the word limitation. It is a very apt word here. So to give you a specific example, this was done looking at how designers work on coming up with ideas and prototypes for new toys. And one group was told you can do whatever you wish. And then another group was told, well, you have to use these particular shapes. And then scientists compared in what condition people are creating toys that are judged by, toy experts and toy buyers and other designers as being more creative. And it turns out that it is so in a constrained condition. And it is so exactly because your mind first goes into the most obvious places when you have full freedom of action.
That's great. Thank you.
I love that particular case as well in the story because it also speaks to the playfulness involved in the research of it is it playful, and that scientists actually get to engage in a form of play as exploration as well as artists. But most people in their jobs, that's not a part of it, right? It's not included. So I'm kind of curious about how one might integrate some of that. Start thinking about how we might integrate that into a workplace situation. Um,
Mm.
what kind of examples did you see?
Well, when I work with workplaces and when I consult, my first step is to go and observe what is going on in a workplace, and then use the examples that I see directly to point to people. These are the things that you already know, but you might not explicitly recognize it. So, talking about the role of emotions in the creative process. First step is notice. Notice what is going on, but notice it explicitly. Then pause. You have noticed it, but don't just say, okay, I noticed it, now life goes on. Think about it and then act. To give you an example, I worked with a very large teaching hospital, and they are very interested in creativity and innovation across different departments. And I was in a department of food services. So you would think, well, what do food services do? They put food for patients on the plates, just like the physicians ordered. So it has to be very precise. So you think, okay, there is nothing here that is possibility for creativity. Yet I have seen a very, very striking example of creativity. And it came exactly from this cycle. So the supervisor in this unit has noticed that his workers were frustrated and exhausted, and there was a lot of turnover among the workers. He noticed it. He then paused and said, what is going on here and what can be done here? Now, I have seen similar situations where people get referred to wellness programs and different resources, but he did something different. He said there is a signal here that something is wrong, and this is an opportunity to solve a problem. And he observed what the cause of the problem is, not on the surface, but below the surface, and recognize that the whole flow of work was misdesigned, misaligned, so that these workers had to stretch. It was uncomfortable. The work orders went in the wrong places. And he completely redesigned the process. Now, there were multiple outcomes of this. So the outcome was less very costly turnaround for the organization. First win. Second win was that workers were happier. They were more satisfied. They were more effective. And the third win was indirect. It was a win that they were more accurate in their work, so that the patients were more likely to get the correct orders. And that is increasing safety, and that is increasing the fundamental function of a hospital, of serving patients. And it all came from noticing emotions, paying attention to them, what are they saying, and then solving for that problem. But the first step is don't discount emotion.
I love how practical that is, because I think sometimes when we're talking about this stuff, it's creativity is still lumped in that category of sort of amorphous, something you do afterwards that's kind of nice, as opposed to something that's essential. And that's really what you're talking about is how important and how profound it can be in a situation like that.
It influences every aspect of the organizational functioning, from you really don't want turnover to your primary function that you were not even aware of was a problem here in the first place.
I love that opportunity too of recognizing emotion as an opportunity for creativity. That there's a tension there.
Emotions are a signal that tell you something. And they tell you something, well, sometimes they tell you that they are in the way, that you are getting overwhelmed, that frustration because you are in a bottleneck has to be dealt with, and you have to do something to get the edge off so that you can broaden your thinking again, think from different perspectives again. And at other times, it's telling you what are opportunities, what are potentials, and which ways you could go.
I love that too, to take note of it and then sit with it for a moment. Nan says in the comments, reiterating that don't discount the emotions. As you said, very quickly, one option would be to okay, what can we do to get rid of these emotions that people are having right away? First thought, right? We just want to get rid of them. What does that mean? But to recognize them as actually opportunity.
Exactly. And sometimes, people have a good intention. Let's get rid of these emotions because these emotions are unpleasant. These emotions have other consequences. But it is important to first learn what they are telling you. And they might be telling you more than one thing.
And that speaks also to this sort of, you talk about the beginning of the book, that there is a discomfort related to creativity, that if you're willing to accept that creativity, or once you accept that creativity is a part of your identity, you're more likely to accept some of that discomfort that goes along with it. I'm paraphrasing. Why do you think that is?
I love how you have chosen the word accept. I have heard other ways of putting it that are, I think, a little bit less helpful. You do not have to be comfortable with risk. You do not have to be comfortable with uncertainty that is part of creativity, but you have to accept it and deal with it, cope with it, although it's there. And it may be there on your shoulder or behind you, somewhere in the back of your mind at all times, because creativity by its very nature is uncertain. If you are trying to do something original, it means it hasn't been done before. If it hasn't been done before, there isn't a turn-by-turn way of getting from here to there. They are self-help books that are going to promise you a particular 6-step or 12-step program. But in reality, that is not true. And that uncertainty is there, and uncertainty psychologically experienced as risk. And some people have greater tolerance for risk. Some people have less. Some people find it less unpleasant than others. But everybody has to tolerate it, accept it, and then cope with it. And for some people, it might take more action in coping. For some people, less. But I very recently came across this quote by Georgia O'Keeffe. And she said that she was terrified. She actually used the word terrified of absolutely everything she did in her life, but that never prevented her from doing it. And I think that is a terrific motto in life. It might be uncomfortable. You might be unsure, but you can do it anyway.
I've never heard that quote. I love that. I wouldn't think of her as someone terrified, right? Think of her as someone really brave and confident. I think for me, one of the most important takeaways of the book relates to sort of helping people with that discomfort, which is the fact that creativity is ultimately social by nature.
Yes, creativity is social even when it doesn't seem to be. So you mentioned I wrote a book. I was the only one writing a book. It sounds like that is a solitary activity. In some ways it is. I was, sitting by the computer, just me. But when we say creativity is social, we have to acknowledge that ideas don't come out of the blue. They don't come out of a vacuum. We develop them in interactions with others, some of which are implicit things that we have read, we have learned, and some of them are explicit. We have chatted about something with colleagues. We have tried out ideas on others. We have had discussions, and all of these are influences on our creativity.
I like that it doesn't seem like an obvious form of collaboration, right? Because I think when you think of collaboration, you think of, okay, two people working together or more people, right? But it's very intentional. But that just the act of discussing things is part of the process. And I realize I do that unconsciously, but now I know that it's actually part of it.
Yes, it's very much part of it. And when we use the word social, we immediately go think of collaboration and teamwork in relation to creativity. And certainly collaboration and teamwork are social, and obviously so. But sometimes even those things where the action itself is solitary are socially influenced.
Yeah, I was thinking there's even a comment about it, about like overcoming the pressure of like coming up with something super unique. And that can sometimes even mean like you said, yesterday I went by myself to a museum just to see, it was a surrealist art show, and just seeing other people's, um, experimental artworks was giving me confidence and feedback that I needed.
That's a terrific example. And you are not in your work, in your day work, working on surrealist art, right? But what you did there was a great example of how we can be intentional about creating breakthroughs and making inspiration more likely to happen. Very practical thing. If you want creativity, you do not focus on one thing exclusively. You do not want to stay, what we sometimes call staying on task. And I think sort of misguidedly calling staying on task. If you want to stay on creative task and have that be a goal, you need to have breadth. You need to have exposure to content, different kinds of content, because creativity is about making connections, and you need to have content to make connections with.
So here we are, we're talking to you as a scientist. You've got research, you've got data. And so, the conceit of this conference, of the summit, I should say, is about this human thing in light of where we seem to be going societally, culturally, especially around generative AI. And that seems to be the thing a lot of people are talking about. It's been on top of mind in so many organizations we work with, people we talk to. How has this transformation, this sort of increase in interest in it and use of these tools, changed your thinking or complemented your thinking, or have you done studies now because of it? What's your response to what's going on with Gen AI, especially in light of sort of human creativity?
I think that most people who are in creativity studies are fascinated by AI because it is doing something. It has this fluency. You ask for ideas, it's going to come up with ideas. Now the question is, what's going on there? There are some similarities in between AI and human creativity. Both AI and human creativity are trained. Training for generative AI is very explicit. We know that they have to be trained in order to be able to do things. In human creativity, it's more implicit. Training there is the sum of our life experiences. And both of us, both the machine and the human, are drawing on the training, on the content that we have been exposed to, and then creating connections in different ways. Now, that is where the similarities are. But there are some very important differences. So the very first studies of generative AI and creative thinking seemed very dramatic, coming up with dramatic headlines of generative AI, ChatGPT in particular, is able to come up with more creative ideas than humans. You know how the devil is in the details? Always in the details. That is not that is not explicitly false, but it is true in a very limited way. It is true in a way if we compare average performance, average ideas, creativity of ideas on average generated by the AI systems with people, humans on average. But real life creativity has never been about averages. Real life creativity has been about people who are willing to stand out. It has been about people who are willing. You have used the word brave when I mentioned Georgia O'Keeffe, who are willing to be brave and courageous, to do something that is uncertain, that is potentially uncomfortable, that you don't know how it's going to end up, and still willing to do it. That is what real life creativity of humans is about. And it has never been about averages. And when you then look into details of that research, you find out that the most creative humans, which is the humans that we are talking about when we talk about creativity, come up with ideas that are more creative than the best ideas generated by AIs. So when we look at what really counts, humans are better able to do it.
I love that you're talking about looking critically at the studies that are being done, because I think that's what happens, right? Is that it's just a lot of stuff's being thrown out and people are just sharing it and not digging in. And it's great to have this viewpoint. And I love what you had to say about it. Honestly, I'm very inspired already by the way that you're talking about it.
And there's another point to it too. There's another part to it, is that humans are the only ones who can do the full range of the creative process. So the AI is going to do something when it is asked. We are the ones asking questions. I mentioned a quote from Georgia O'Keeffe. I like quotes. I came across this quote by Einstein in one of his papers about science and the nature of science. And he was stressing not the problem-solving part. He actually argued that the problem-solving part, when he was talking in science in particular, is less impressive or less difficult than the part of asking the right questions. Asking questions that are going to lead places. Even if we are talking about the same topic, there are different ways we can ask a question. And that part scientists call problem finding and problem construction. You're working on one thing, but you can look at it from different angles. And the AI is not going to on its own come up with that. We are, even if we are working with the AI as a tool or as a partner or co-creating with it, we are the ones saying how to pose a question. When we get some feedback, we then reformulate and consider it critically. That is a thing that uniquely is human, and the part of critical thinking. And then if there is a physical product, taking it physically and building it, those remain at this time in the realm of human creativity only. Now, I am not saying that, in the 24th century, that might be the same thing, but we are at this time rather far from AIs being able to do all of the range of human creativity. That doesn't mean that they are still not going to take over some jobs that we considered human creativity previously. But there's going to be also a lot of opportunity for humans to enhance their work.
It makes me think about another part of your book where you talk about a sort of pitfall of thinking of designers or creative professionals as technicians.
Yeah, that is a set of studies where scientists have examined what kinds of roles people who are hiring designers are putting them in. Do they allow them to be part of the full process? Or do they say, here is everything we want to do, you just execute it. And you have to stay with this one way of framing a problem. If a designer does not have the ability to frame a problem in different ways, their solutions are not going to be the best ones.
So, right, we are the ROI of Creativity Summit. So we want to know how you would define the return on investment of creativity.
That is a fantastic question, and I love this question because of that thing. We can look at it from different perspectives. So let's look at it from different perspectives. So I am changing my position, speaking of different perspectives, because I have this light shining of me, like from
You're
high
glowing.
above.
You're literally glowing.
I am literally glow because this question is so inspirational. So, I love this question because we can look at it from different perspectives. We can look at it from a perspective of, let's imagine what would happen if there wasn't creativity and innovation. What would happen if in those cases where we say we value it, but we end up deciding that the risks are too great for us to take them. And let's just take that route for a second. So consider that you are staying with a smartphone keyboard, physical keyboard, at a time when new developments are going in a direction of full screen displays. Does that sound familiar? That happened in real life, where the innovation did not happen, and pretty much there was a company that went from being the top of the top to being irrelevant. So we see with an example of what happens when creativity is not there. Then we can take a different perspective and say, okay, what happens when we go for creativity? Well, earlier I mentioned an example of creativity in a very unusual place, very unobvious place. Often we think of creativity, that is in the domain of research and development, that is in the domain of design, maybe marketing. But it doesn't have to be. It can be in the domain of any kind of role or part of an organization. So I mentioned a supervisor in a food services department who, by paying attention to emotions, getting inspired, noticing a problem, ended up creating multiple wins, from a lesser turnaround to greater patient safety and better patient outcomes from an act of innovation. So we see that there are multiple outcomes that can happen if we take innovation seriously.
Was there anything surprising you discovered in the course of putting your book together about creativity?
Well, the book was based on science, so I had to read a lot of things, and I wanted to draw from different domains, what creativity scholars call domains. So different areas of life and human activity where creativity happens. And what I have found is that there are some principles that are common across all of these different ways creativity can happen. What I have found is that there are emotions, and creativity is a roller coaster of emotions, from, well, anxiety, facing the blank screen, but also joy of inspiration and excitement. Inspiration coming from, well, sometimes frustration or dissatisfaction with the status quo. It can be turned into something different. And although we don't experience our emotions as something that we can influence, we do have agency, and we can nudge them in one direction or another, and we can influence their course. So that is one thing. And then another thing is this importance of playing or exploration of different perspectives. And it may be, it may seem obvious. Well, artists or designers are exploring different perspectives. And my favorite study is with artists, where researchers have observed how they put together a still life drawing. And what they found is that those most creative still life drawings were not made by artists who came to this large pile of potential props and then chosen some, arranged them, and then spent all their time doing the painting and perfecting it. No, it was done by those who took objects, arranged them, stepped back, sketched very quickly, went back, rearranged them, then started feeling the objects, comparing them, feeling their textures, feeling their weights. They were fully exploring, full body exploration of this process. And that may seem intuitive that, okay, artists do that, but does that apply to organizations? And it does in really important ways. I would say that organizations want to survive, right? That is number one thing that you want to do. Makes sense? So this study, massive study, more than 38,000 startups, and then an analysis, more than 6.3 million job postings to see at which point startups are starting to scale up. And again, it came down to exploration. Those startups that scaled up in the first 6 to 12 months after being founded had 20 to 40% greater chance of not making it than those that are starting to scale up after 2 years. And the key ingredient was exploration. Those who engaged very intentionally and explicitly in exploration, tested different features, pinning them against each other to explore the potential of their product, those were the ones that survived. Exactly what artists did is what happens to organizations. Of course, it's going to look different, right? Depending on your product, but the principle is the same. It's the principle of exploration and not rushing for the sake of rushing.
I just love that, this is stuff that as artists, Mike and I experience and know intuitively. And here you are saying, here's the study, here's the data. It's great. So the last thing I want to ask you about is, since our practice of the creative sprint, where we say practice your creativity, develop your capacity, is about forming habits as a regular practice. What is a habit that you recommend cultivating, or maybe have even cultivated in yourself that you'd like to share?
You said one, but
you can do more. Of course, as many as you want.
Can I have a few?
Yeah, it's a creative response.
I am just going to be a little bit rebellious to stay with the theme here. One thing is expanding interests. When you expand your interests and you expand the range of things you're aware of in the world, you are going to be able to think more broadly and to build your creativity. So, Micah, like you were mentioning, you went to see a surrealist exhibit. It is not obvious how it's going to relate to what you are doing with your organization, but it will find its way. Remember how Steve Jobs did not know upfront how his calligraphy course is going to be relevant to so much later on, but it became so. In the moment, it doesn't have to seem relevant. Another thing is that scientists have found that just asking for creativity, demanding it, makes people more creative. Very counterintuitive, because people say you cannot rush creativity, you cannot push creativity. You actually can. When you ask people be creative in this activity, they are more likely to do so. So be intentional. This is a task that requires or is an opportunity for creativity. I am going to intentionally ask for it from others and ask for it for myself. The way you can do that is just ask yourself, hey, how can I approach this creatively? And it starts opening your thinking on its own. And the third and final one, notice creativity around you. What that does is, again, multiple things. Acknowledge it in others who you work with. Hey, that was creative. That was really unexpected. That has potential, because that is going to build their creative confidence. And also notice it in yourself. Notice it as, hey, this is something that just happened. This may be a new direction, and it made me one worth investing in.
Thank you. Those are all excellent.
Yeah, thank you so much for your generosity today, Zorana. Really appreciate it. It's a lot to chew on. And part of this is just to kind of, be the tip of the iceberg for people in terms of learning about you and your work today. So if they want to find out more, what's the first place that they should go, besides buying your book, of course?
Well, certainly find a book, but I have a website that I'm sure you can share in the notes. That is the first place to find me. And if you want to stay in touch, and if you want to get periodic, bi-weekly bits on creativity, I write a Substack newsletter that comes directly into your inbox.
Excellent.
And you are also a frequent contributor to many publications, so that's also out there. Great opportunity to read more of this work. Yeah, thank you.
Well, this has just been terrific. I feel like we could talk about so much more together. Thank you again, Zorana. It was a delight.
Thank you for having me. It was so nice to chat.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. This conversation was recorded live at the 2025 ROI of Creativity Summit. Check out the video version on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. ROI of Creativity is brought to you by Another Limited Rebellion and Preview Media. Executive producer, Nikki Frankel, producer, Gina Bouchard, social director, Stevan Vlaschke, and our editors are Jasmine Jackson and Gina Bouchard.
And until next time, remember, creativity is a practice.